So everybody, I would like to introduce Josh Nelson, who you already had a chance to hear a few words from earlier this evening. Josh, as he mentioned earlier, is our Assistant General Counsel for the Citrus Heights Water District. As a partner of Best & Krieger's Municipal Law Practice Group, he provides city attorney and general counsel services to a number of clients. He is general counsel for the Alpine Springs County Water District, the Beckworth Fire District, the North Tahoe Public Utility District, the Plumas Eureka Community Services District, and the Tahoe Resources Conservation District. Josh is also the city attorney for the cities of Gustine and Jackson. And this evening he will be discussing with us the Brown Act, the Public Records Act, and most fun of all, potentially, the Conflict of Interest Act.
Thanks, Chris. So we did want to kind of give a brief introduction to some of the laws that apply to the CAC because it is part of the water district and it is part of a public agency. Full disclosure, this is not the most exciting stuff we're going to talk about in the CAC process. Initially we were going to do this training at the end of the night, but we realized you'd all be asleep, and so we moved it up to the middle. That being said, it really is important stuff. The reason, one thing I noticed when you were all talking was, the outreach and how, much value you saw in that process. And part of that is the trust that you as members of the public and now you members of the CAC have in the district. And respecting that trust and building on that trust, it's really important that we do comply with these regulations. So the way we're going to split up the presentation is first we'll talk about the Brown Act and the PRA, the Public Records Act, and then we'll talk about conflict of interest. But before we dive into conflict of interest, we'll have a part there for questions. And I really do encourage questions. I think the best way to really discuss this material, because it is a little dense, it is a little boring, is to try to get a discussion or a dialogue going about what you can or can't do. I know a lot of you have local government experience, but for those of you that do not, the Brown Act is California's open meeting law, and it applies to all local agencies and all what are called legislative bodies of those local agencies, which includes the Citizens Advisory Committee. In addition, the Public Records Act, pretty self-explanatory there. It is essentially the right of any member of the public to see all records that are maintained by the district. And record, as we'll talk about in a couple of slides, is very, very broad. And it really is anything that relates to what the district does unless some exception applies. So with that, the Brown Act. So the Brown Act has some requirements for meetings of legislative bodies, and it requires that those meetings be open and public. We'll talk about each of those elements, but we'll do it a little bit out of order. The first one we'll talk about is what's considered a legislative body under the Brown Act. To a certain extent, this is pretty easy. A legislative body is the governing body of a local agency like the district. So, for our example, our board of directors, clearly a legislative body. The Brown Act is not that limited. It also applies to all advisory committees or commissions which are created by formal action of the legislative body. For those of you who are at the swearing in, you notice that the board of directors adopted a resolution creating the Citizens Advisory Committee. That's formal action, and so by the adoption of that resolution, the Citizens Advisory Committee became a legislative body and is subject to the Brown Act. I think we talked about this already. I think we've all seen these sort of cartoons, the sort of jokes. There is a perception that local government or government in general can be a little closed off and can be sort of back rooms with decisions and the Brown Act really ensures that that's not the case. Moving on. So what's a meeting under the Brown Act? A meeting under the Brown Act is any time a majority of the members of a legislative body, so in your case, anytime 10 of the CAC members, because there's 19 of you, are at the same time and place to hear, discuss, deliberate, talk about any item of business that within the CAC's jurisdiction, you have a meeting. Very, very broad definition. That being said, there are some exceptions. So if the entire CAC decides to attend a board of directors meeting of the Citrus Heights Water District, and that board of directors meeting is noticed and agendized, and we'll talk about what that means in a couple of slides, it's totally okay for you to do that. And the fact that you all attended that meeting does not make it also a meeting of the CAC. Similarly, hopefully at the end of this process, there will be a ribbon cutting or some other ceremonial occasion. It was okay for the entire CAC to attend that ceremonial occasion without it constituting a meeting of the full body. Similarly, you all may decide that you need some information, or you might have questions, or you might talk to a member of the public about what you're doing on the CAC. And that's okay. There's nothing that prohibits any CAC member from talking to anybody who's not on the CAC, as long as we don't have a serial meeting. We'll talk in a slide about what that means. Similarly, it is not a Brown Act violation for CAC members to talk to other CAC members, as long as you don't use all of those discussions to end up talking to 10 or more of you. So if you end up becoming really close to a member of the CAC here and you want to talk about what was talked about at a meeting with that person outside of a meeting, that's okay. Just try to limit that discussion to less than 10 CAC members. In addition, one thing that's up here is a standing committee. So the CAC, with staff, may ultimately decide to have smaller groups focus on individual items or issues, and how those groups are composed and how they're formed will depend whether or not those smaller groups are subject to the Brown Act. I didn't really want to get into the exact specifics of that tonight, but I wanted to note it for you. Chris and Missy and the rest of the staff will kind of walk you through that process. But if you do notice that one of your smaller group meetings is agendized, there's a reason for that. Okay. So the way that the Brown Act trips up the majority of folks, so the ways you can get in trouble with the Brown Act is through what's called a serial meeting. So what the Brown Act says is that you cannot, a majority of the CAC or any other Brown Act body cannot, outside of a noticed and agendized meeting, use a series of communications to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item of business. I think the best way to explain this prohibition is through some of the examples or ways that it can happen. So traditionally, the ways you ran into serial meeting problems is first through what was called a daisy chain. So we have 19 CAC members, and one CAC member might call up another CAC member about something that was discussed outside of a meeting and provide their inputs and have a discussion. And then that CAC member B will text CAC member C and let CAC member C know what A and B talked about, and so on. And eventually, if that daisy chain gets long enough, and our magic number is 10, and if we get to that point where we have 10 CAC members outside of a meeting talking about business, that's a meeting under the Brown Act. And unless it was noticed and agendized, and it clearly wasn't, that's a Brown Act violation. So clearly you want to avoid that. But it's not just those types of situations. It also can involve the use of a third-party intermediary through the hub and spoke serial meeting. So in this situation, you do not have a CAC member directly communicating with any other CAC member. Rather, you might have a CAC member who talks to one member of the public, and then that member of the public talks to another CAC member, and then a third CAC member, and a fourth CAC member, and a fifth CAC member. And eventually, when we get to 10, we'll have a Brown Act violation if that member of the public has been facilitating a conversation among those other 10 members. While I used a member of the public in the example, it's not limited to that situation. So it could be staff. It could be me. It could be anyone. You know, it is important to note on this and to kind of distinguish from what we talked about. You know, individual contacts are okay. So if it's okay for me to talk to somebody and that person can talk to every other member of the CAC, where do we run into a problem with the Brown Act? And the way you run into a problem with the Brown Act is if the views, ideas, thoughts of CAC members are being communicated through that third party to everybody else. So that's sort of traditionally how we ran into serial meeting problems. Unfortunately, you know, while technology has made all of our lives a lot easier for communicating with each other, you know, that's a bad thing potentially for the Brown Act, and specifically for email. So nowadays, the most common way you have an inadvertent serial meeting is through an email. So you have an email that's sent, let's say, from me to the entire CAC. Everybody's emails are listed in the to field. And a CAC member wants to comment on something that was included in the email that was sent out. Rather than hitting reply and just replying back to the person who had sent the email, the CAC member inadvertently hits reply all. And the thoughts of that CAC member have now gone to the entire group. And so all the other CAC members know what that CAC member thinks. And that CAC member had a great point, and so another CAC member replies all with her thoughts. And then a third CAC member replies all with his thoughts. And so what do we have in that situation? You know, we have the entire CAC outside of a notice and agendized meeting using email to have a discussion. And that's a Brown Act issue. You know, that's something we will want to avoid. Based on that, and we'll talk a little bit about email when we get to public records as well, you know, it is our recommendation that if you do have any questions or thoughts outside of a CAC meeting, please direct those to Chris or Missy, and then Chris or Missy can distribute those to the rest of the CAC, agendize your thoughts for something to discuss at a meeting or that way. Okay, so the last element of the Brown Act is that meetings of legislative bodies must be open in public. There are really two important things for that for our purposes. The first is the agenda. So our agenda for tonight was really just an orientation, so it was sort of a broad description. But you'll notice, starting at your next meeting, you'll have a relatively specific agenda which will list all the items that staff is hoping will address that night. And that's important because that agenda must be posted for a regular meeting at least 72 hours before that meeting, and it's posted, you know, at the district offices. It'll also be posted on the website. And for a special meeting, that agenda must be posted 24 hours in advance. In addition to having that agenda be posted, there are restrictions on what the CAC or any legislative body can actually discuss at a meeting. Generally, you can only discuss items that are actually listed on your agenda. Now, there are two exceptions to that. You can add an item if it's an emergency. I note that we will hopefully never have one of those in this process. They're incredibly rare. They're true emergencies. They're things like there was a major issue with the water system and we need to have the board of directors meet immediately to take action. In addition, there's what's called an urgency item, and that has a sort of specific definition, and that's a situation where there's a need for immediate action, and that need for immediate action came to the CAC's attention after the agenda was posted. Again, I think given the nature of the CAC, very, very unlikely you will ever have an urgency item added to your agenda. But just in case you do, you know, I wanted to note it first tonight. And then second, to assure you that if we ever are in that situation, Chris and Missy and the rest of the staff will be able to kind of walk you through how to do that. Okay, the second big part of the open and public part of a public meeting is the public. So the public has participation rights. So one of the things that, you know, I personally love about working in local government is that the citizens gets to see how the sausage is made, right? So the legislature, when they do stuff, it's behind closed doors. We really don't know what's going to happen until it's happened. Local government, under the Brown Act, can't do it that way. So even if it's a controversial item, even if it's an embarrassing thing to talk about, even if it's uncomfortable, that discussion needs to happen open to the public. Members of the public also, in addition to watching how the sausage is made, have the right to speak. And for a regular meeting, they have the right to speak on anything that's within the district's jurisdiction at some point during the meeting. So you will notice, beginning at your next agenda, that there will be a point on there for public comment. And the point of that is that there ends up being a member of the public who wants to come in and talk about something that's completely unrelated to what you're talking about. He or she has the right to do so. And the chair will recognize that person and give them the ability to speak. For both regular and special meetings, the public has the right to address you on items that are actually on your agenda. And they can do so before or during your consideration of the item. We will get to see this towards the end of our agenda tonight, where we do have a session for public comment, and Laura will kind of walk us through that. And if we do have a member of the public who shows up who wants to talk about this orientation, he or she will have the right to do so. In addition, the public has the right to make audio and video recordings. So we are posting this on YouTube. We're videotaping it. So to a certain extent, not as big of a deal as some other agencies. But for agencies that don't have TV or audio video recording, or if someone just simply wishes to, any member of the public can come and bring their iPhone or camcorder or whatever they wish to video or audio tape this meeting. This happens probably more frequently than you would imagine. For those of you who aren't as familiar with local government issues, I have a couple of clients where we have members of the public. They come, they bring out their iPhone, and they videotape the entire meeting. What they do with that is really up to them. They might post it on YouTube. They might put it on their computer. It's their call. The only restriction on the right to make audio or video recordings is that it can't be actually disruptive to the meeting. So if I was a member of the public and I wanted to record this meeting, I could do it clearly from behind all of you. But if I wanted to, come up and take out my phone and get in Chris's face and get a close up, we can say, sir or ma'am, you really can't do that. We need you to, sit in the back and not disrupt the meeting. So why does this matter? So why it matters is there are some remedies for Brown Act violations. Starting from the bottom and most serious, anyone who intentionally violates the Brown Act, it's technically a misdemeanor under the law. In addition, anyone can sue a public agency for a violation of the Brown Act, and if they win in that process, they are entitled to recover their attorney's fees and costs. In addition, if the judge decides that there was a violation, the judge can enjoin the action. So say, agency, stop violating the Brown Act, don't do it again. Can invalidate the action. So if the board of directors, for example, approved a contract in violation of the Brown Act, the judge can issue an order that says that contract's invalid. You need to go do it again. And then third, mandate correction. Can say, okay, all the items you took on your meeting on June 1st, they were in violation of the Brown Act. You need to come back on June 15th and redo everything. And the one that's not on the slide, but in my opinion is by far the most important, there's a perception issue. Brown Act violations are really embarrassing, right? They sort of give in to all of those folks out there who like to criticize local government for being secret or not transparent, and it really is just a black eye. We all are here to do the people's business, try to do what's right for the ratepayers, and if we get called on for violating the Brown Act, it's frankly just embarrassing. All right, so moving on to the Public Records Act, or sometimes you'll hear me lapse into legal jargon and call it the PRA. Already talked about this a little bit, but the general rule is that any local government record in any form is subject to public inspection during office hours or copying upon the payment of direct duplication costs. And record is incredibly broad here. It's not just pieces of paper. It's really any tangible item that relates to the district's business. So this could be a text message, it could be an email, it could be a voicemail, it could be a Facebook posting, it could be a tweet, it could be a direct message on Twitter. It's just incredibly broad. So, I wanted to put this up here because I think it's sometimes important to remember how opaque this whole process can be to those who aren't involved in it all the time. Someone coming in thinking that they're looking for help, and they're just sort of sent on a maze of all the different places before they can get to what they're looking for. But the most important slide for your purposes for PRA is right up here. You may have read it, you may have heard about it, you may have read about it. The California Supreme Court last year had a really important decision. Decision arose out of the city of San Jose. Basic question before the court was whether emails that relate to city business that are held on a private cell phone or in a private email account, whether those constitute public records. And the court said that they absolutely do. And so what that means for all of you, and myself included, is that if any two CAC members use your private Gmail accounts to talk about CAC business, those emails are public records. And if we ever received a request for all communications related to the CAC or all emails sent regarding the CAC, we would have an obligation to attempt to get those emails from you. And that would be a really unfun process, both for staff as well as you. It would involve us either going through email or asking you to send us those emails, and then ultimately disclosing those. Based on that, what we would recommend and what we would request is that you not use your private emails to discuss CAC business with other CAC members unless a Citrus Heights Water District staff member is included in the discussion. And our recommendation would be that any of those discussions not really ever occur between CAC members by email or text message or other private device, and that those questions again be referred to Miss Chrissy or Chris or Missy. So that they can keep track of all those, so that if we do receive a request, we won't have to bother you, we won't have to intrude in your privacy. We can say, we know that we have all the responsive emails, and we can send those out. Again, this is not just a hypothetical, it's not just a scare tactic on our part or my part. Regularly agencies receive requests for these types of emails. Especially since this case has come out, journalists or bloggers or any member of the public will request, all emails sent by the board of directors or the planning commission or anybody related to a project, just to see what they might find. Okay. So again, if you do have any questions on this, we can talk about those right now. And if you do have any questions going forward, again, please direct those to Chris or Missy. So do we have any questions about the Brown Act or Public Records Act? Okay. All right. If we do have any questions as I move on to conflicts of interest, feel free to raise your hand. We can jump back. So conflicts of interest. I put this up here because I'm a lawyer. I kind of like lawyer jokes. It says, my fees are quite high, and yet you say you have little money. I think I'm seeing a conflict of interest here. And actually, before we get started, I did want to did want to share a lawyer joke, and I was actually looking for a good one that'd be clean to share, and you'd be surprised how hard that is to find. I'm actually pretty sure that IT is going to knock on my door tomorrow and have a conversation. But the one I did find is how many lawyer jokes, or no, I can't even think of it. Just a second. How many lawyer jokes are there? Many. 2. The rest are true. All right. Okay. So back to the regularly scheduled programming. So what are we talking about with conflicts of interest? So these are situations where an official or an employee cannot participate in a decision due to a personal interest in what's going on. And that personal interest can arise in 2 ways. First, it can be financial, so the person has a monetary stake, or their monetary interests are somehow affected by the decision. Or it could be a non-financial. So they have some sort of personal interest that's affected to the point that they just cannot fairly make the decision. So I do have a picture from Nixon up here when he resigned, and the reason for that is most of the conflict of interest rules that we have in California were adopted in response to the Watergate scandal. So the most important conflict of interest rule we have in California that was adopted in response to Watergate is the Political Reform Act, or the other PRA. And there also is a section which predates the Political Reform Act, which is called Government Code Section 1090. These are, really complicated and sort of beyond what we're going to talk about tonight. But the general gist here is that they prevent officials from participating in decisions or making recommendations that affect their financial interests. All of you might be saying, well, that's going to be a problem because I'm a ratepayer, or my business is a ratepayer, or my district is a ratepayer. How do I not have a financial conflict in that? And the answer is, well, you might, but there's a great exception that applies. So there's a recognized exception that allows a public official to participate in a decision if that decision is going to affect all district ratepayers equally. We don't need to get into the specifics here, but the rule is not just all as all in that everyone must be treated the same. It does allow some segmentation, so it might be a decision that affects all businesses the same or all residential customers the same. If you ever are in a situation where something that the CAC is talking about somehow uniquely affects you, you own the property that's right across the street from where this big water main decision is, or you're the only business in town that might somehow be affected by what the CAC is discussing, just raise that with Chris or Missy so they can kind of walk you through that process. More than likely an exception is going to apply and you won't have an issue, but you don't want to inadvertently run afoul of these rules. And the reason for that is they make for really big headlines. The newspaper loves this sort of stuff because readers love this. It sells paper, and unfortunately it happens more often than I wish that it didn't. Okay, so in addition to the financial interests, there is the just sort of general judge-made law that prevents officials from participating in decisions where the official has a personal bias. So, I have such strong feelings against the person that's before us that there's no way I could make this decision. Or the person before us is such my best friend, or that there's no way I couldn't be swayed by what was happening. In addition to that, there's also the pay attention rule. So if someone comes before a local agency or a local board, and the local board just isn't paying attention to them, there have been cases where they've actually sued the agency for being denied their rights under the law because they just weren't paying attention. And I do have a picture of a gentleman sleeping up here because that's exactly what happened. So there was a case out of Southern California where someone came to, I believe it was the Planning Commission. The planning commissioners were looking at their phone, they were having side conversations, they were getting up the dais and just leaving. And the person sued and said, hey, you weren't even listening to me. The judge ultimately agreed and forced them to redo that hearing. So I know, we all have lives, we all have a lot of things to do. We are very thankful and appreciative that you're here and participating in that process. But as part of that, it is important that if you're here, you're involved in the conversation and participating. Another one there. Okay, so I think I've already mentioned this, but if you or your interests are uniquely affected by a decision, talk to Chris or Missy. They can walk you through this. If for some reason you do have a conflict of interest, it's not a big deal. All it means is that you will not be able to participate in that portion of the conversation. You'll just say, I have a conflict, and you will leave the room or sit in the audience depending on what it is. I really think it's important to note here that admitting you have a conflict of interest and following these rules does not mean you did anything wrong. In fact, it means you did everything right. It's when you participate in a decision, when you have a conflict, that's where you can run into issues. So again, Chris and Missy's contact information on the slide, but I'd be happy to answer any questions about the Brown Act, PRA, or conflicts of interest. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right, let's keep going then. And no questions on the legal aspect? Great overview. All right, so let's go and look at the CAC process and the logistics. You all have in front of you a graphic. And we just wanted to walk through this. And so Harris and Associates put this together, so I think it's a great way to see how things are going to flow. And these may adjust a bit as we get into the process. What we're going to focus on tonight are the flip charts down at the bottom of the page. But above, you can see how your meetings also relate to the different aspects of the project. So tonight's the orientation, you're in the middle of that. And then our official meeting number 1 will be on May 29th. And so at that point, we'll have a much more detailed overview of the Project 2030, a much more detailed overview of the district, and you will be selecting a chair and a vice chair for the CAC. When we finish going through this, then I'll talk more about the chair and the vice chair role. Then on August the 28th, we'll look at main replacement basics, so getting more information about main replacements, an understanding of levels of service, an introduction to that, and then work will have been being done on the asset inventory, and so you'll be getting feedback on what's been learned as part of that asset inventory. The third meeting will be on December the 11th. So at that point, you'll be looking at the findings and the costs related to the main replacements, looking at some funding concept introduction, and then also selection of options. So these are the meetings that are scheduled for this part of the year. Next year, we're looking at meetings in March, May, and September. And so that gives you a sense. We don't yet have the specific dates. Roger, is there anything else that would be helpful? Am I enough of an overview, or is there anything more specific that you think would be helpful?
No, I think you covered it great.
Okay. So then looking then at 2019, you'll be looking at the main replacement funding analysis. So we'll be working with the funding consultants and also getting a sense of market research, because we'll be going out and using a market research firm to test, and Chris covered that earlier. And then you'll be selecting main replacement and funding packages. So looking at 2 particular options that we can then test doing a statistical test. You'll then, in the 5th meeting, see the results of that market research, and you'll be developing a final recommendation to the board and looking at steps with regard to implementing the plan. And the 6th meeting, the final meeting, will be reviewing the implementation plan. So that just gives you a broad overview of the 6 meetings. Questions? Oh, and if you would, you have mics, you just need to push the button on the mic so that we can hear the questions.
A couple questions.
Is that on?
Yeah, you have to speak into them.
Great.
A couple questions. Can someone explain what the demand forecasts consist of? And the second question is the main replacement basics. Is it any way possible we could do that in the first workshop, or are we limited by time? Because it doesn't seem to me that the selection of the chair and vice chair would take that long. And then the project overview, could the main replacement basics be included as part of that, since that's the main focus of the whole reason why we're here? Kind of jump ahead on that.
Well, let me, a couple thoughts. We, in one of our earlier meetings, we had developed an agenda both for this meeting as well as for workshop number 1. And it seemed, and I'm trying to remember the exact details, but number 1 seemed much fuller than what's shown right here. So it seemed to me that there was a lot we were trying to pack into workshop number 1 before we even get to any of the specifics.
Let me just jump in.
Please.
One of the things that is not listed here is we're going to have a much more detailed budget and operational briefing of the district itself in that meeting.
Okay.
And
got
so that's going to take a lot of time.
Okay.
And we've really just scratched the surface in terms of introducing a little bit of the history and background on the district tonight, but we're going to get a lot more into the weeds about how we're structured and how we operate in our current budget and financial situation, so that you have some base information to work off of as we begin to then look at some of the more technical and financial issues surrounding Project 2030.
Okay.
So it's sort of like building layers onto a house.
Certainly, that answers my question on that one. Could you explain the demand forecast, what that consists?
You bet, David. So part of the planning process is going to involve that look ahead to the future, to 2030, to 2055, and even beyond that. And that will be the snapshot of not only what what the current conditions are in terms of way things are, but also what do we need to be planning for the future. The district has already done sort of prior to our direct involvement, had done some updating of their hydraulic model, and that's also a tool that's used to help size pipes for future development, for future growth. And so the demand forecast it's a water demand forecast, and it's tied to population projections, records that either the county has or just other public records that are out there. So that part of it is really kind of to help tie down what the underlying assumptions are when we really kind of get into the analyses. Because an example for that might be, there might be a 8-inch pipe in the ground now between Greenback and Madison or Greenback and Oak type of a thing. But that 8-inch line might not be suitable for the future. We might decide, boy, if we're going to replace it with something, we may want to replace it with a 10-inch or a 12-inch. And so that's the purpose of looking ahead is, okay, so if we're talking about replacing any given segment of pipe, do we replace it with a pipe that's the same size, or do we replace it with something bigger? I suppose in some instances, it could be replaced with something smaller, although that probably doesn't happen very often. But so that's basically what that is. It's just kind of laying the groundwork. What are the assumptions that we're using in terms of making the analysis? David, your other question was about main replacement basics, and the intent there was really to really kind of talk about what are the nuts and bolts, and what's the big deal about all of this. I mean, I think as Missy said, there's an avalanche of water mains that have to be replaced, but what does that mean? What does that look like? And I think David, you had a good example, like, well, I don't want the streets torn up 3 or 4 times here, when this is being done. And so that main replacement work can involve, well, it usually does involve tearing up the streets, but there's all sorts of things that go into just replacing a simple pipe in the ground. And so the intent of that is really, it's almost really kind of what's a day in the life of David here as he's trying to organize his staff to say, okay, we got to go out and fix this pipe here. And related to that, I think is going to be one of the things that we'll want to distinguish. That is, what does it mean to respond to a pipe break or a leak or something reactively versus to be more proactive? And as you might imagine, reacting to a water leak when the water is gushing up out of the street and you have to do emergency repairs and emergency shutdowns and stuff, that's usually going to be a more expensive proposition than if we proactively plan to replace pipes that we know are getting near the end of their life. So it'll be just sort of walking through, what does it mean to the district here when we have to go out and replace a pipe. So any questions about that?
Yeah, I actually had another question, but piggybacking on what he was just saying on the demand forecast. Most of the time we're used to assessing demand by zoning. And I know that a lot of this has already been built out, but there's been legislative happenings right here in Sacramento that are going to substantially change a lot of that, with additional dwelling units being allowed on any R1 lot. Now, that's not something that most planners have taken into account, but I would think that looking at Citrus Heights and Orangeville area and saying, what is the potential for additional dwelling units as it relates to a demand assessment?
You're absolutely correct. I mean, we will be using, the most up-to-date current planning models and forecasting models in order to develop that demand forecast. One of the other challenges that, a lot of districts and cities face is, when you're making projections, what do you use as that projection basis? All of us can still remember, the drought here that we just came out of. And, so there's almost sort of a before the drought, what, per capita water use was versus after the drought, what per capita water use is. And of course, we read in the paper about concerns about people in general kind of going back to their old ways, using water as they did before. But that's an important planning decision, is to predict and make certain assumptions as far as what that future is going to hold in terms of people's water use patterns and behavior. So all of that will go into that demand forecasting model.
Okay,
So-
then, sorry.
Did you have another question?
Yes, I did. In the brochure, the newsletter that went out, there were 2 other areas that you had mentioned was going to be of concern to the CAC, and one was the meter replacement program, and the other was the disposition of the wells and some of the concerns for replacing some of them. So is that not part of this then, or?
So certainly the meter replacement program is within the scope of the Customer Advisory Committee. Not so much sure about the disposition of wells. Not sure where you saw that, that is a project that we're working on at the staff level. But regarding the meter replacement program, that study and that effort is operating or moving on a little bit of a slower track than this project. And the reason is very simple. This project is a Citrus Heights Water District only project. We're only focused on water mains for our district. The meter replacement program is evolving and growing into a multi-agency effort, because the replacement of meters really does lend itself to economies of scale. So the more that we can partner with other water districts, the better. So we've been working to develop that consortium of water agencies, and it's been going very well, but it takes a little bit longer to put that effort together. And so we're in the process of doing that right now. And once we have matured that project to a point where we're ready then to move forward as a group to do a planning study, we will be involving the Customer Advisory Committee here for our portion of that planning study. So we'll have much more information for you about the meter replacement program in the near future. And of course, that's one of the reasons we wanted to have Rex Muir here tonight, because Rex is the equivalent of Missy Pieri for that water meter replacement program.
Okay,
So,
sorry, there was just one more. When you're talking about the water main program, that has to do, at least in my understanding, also with the water source. So you're talking about if there's going to be any, and this is where it touched into the wells, in that same brochure or newsletter, it talked about spending district money for dropping another well into it. And so I was wondering if that was also part of this, because if you are going to be creative with some other ways of finding new water sources, then those water sources have to have a way of being funneled into the main or to the
Sure.
computations, the needs, the demands for the future.
Yes, and I think you've kind of touched on it just right. I think to the extent that the water main system or network will have an interconnect with our groundwater program, we may touch on some of our groundwater program. It's not a major focus of this Customer Advisory Committee. The focus is really on the network of mains that will need to be replaced in this period between 2030 and 2055. But as you point out, I think correctly, to the point that there is a connection with the groundwater program, we'll touch on that. Just as a by way of introduction to what Peg is talking about, we do maintain a very healthy groundwater program in addition to the surface water program that we have. About 90% of our water that we deliver to you, our customers, comes from Folsom Lake. It's treated, purchased surface water, but we do have a network of 6 high-capacity groundwater wells. So about 10% of our overall water supply comes from those groundwater wells, and we're expanding our groundwater program. We think we can go to about 10 wells. We're currently in various stages of acquisition for property for wells 7 and 8. So we'll touch on that, but it'll be more tangential to the program here.
So one of the really important things for your group is to make sure you're all on the same page of understanding before you start then developing recommendations. So a big part of these initial first meetings is really building that shared understanding. Some of you may come in with a lot of understanding of some of the issues, some may not have that, but we want you all to feel comfortable and get the information you need up front so that you'll feel comfortable making recommendations as part of the process. And I'm sure some of the elements here may get adjusted a bit, but this is our general sense at this point of what will be covered when. So let's keep going then and look at the chair and the vice chair. Like, what is that? So we want you to be able to nominate yourself if you would like to be the chair or the vice chair of your CAC. I'll continue to facilitate the meetings, but wanted to go through what will be the role of the chair, and if the chair is unable to act, what will be the role of the vice chair. So the chair and the selection of the chair and vice chair will take place at the end of meeting number 1. And from that point forward, the chair will call the meetings to order, lead the Pledge of Allegiance, turn it over to me so that I can facilitate the process, and the chair and vice chair can participate with everyone else. If there is any voting, when there is any voting as part of this process, the chair would handle that voting process. For the public comment portions of the meeting, the chair would manage that part of the process. The chair would then close the meeting. The chair would act as the official spokesperson for the CAC when presenting Project 2030 CAC updates to the board. So at the 30% point in the process, the 60% point in the process, Your group will be presenting updates, and the chair would be doing that for representing all of you. And then at the end of the process, when you have a majority position on any recommendations, the chair would be presenting those to the board. So that would be the role of the chair, and the vice chair would act for the chair if for some reason the chair cannot act at a particular meeting. So we would really encourage any of you that would like to nominate yourself to chair or vice chair the CAC. Please send an email to Chris Castruda, and his email address is here, and I believe you have that already. And then we'll prepare a ballot that will then come back to you at the end of the first meeting. And then the chair will then take on those duties starting in meeting 2. So questions about the role of the chair or the vice chair? Anything you're curious about? So we hope that you'll be interested, and some of you will be interested, and will nominate yourselves and just let Chris know. Okay, let's keep going then, and let's look at the meeting number 1, which is your first meeting, and you saw that on your schedule, and that is scheduled for May 29th. And I think we have a slide for that. So again, the major projects or the major topics for that meeting are an overview of the administration, the capital, and the operation of the Citrus Heights Water Districts. And that's what Hillary was referring to, really giving you a much more in-depth understanding of the district. Then hearing a much more detailed presentation about the Project 2030 water main replacement. So an overview of that in much more detail. And then the election of the chair and the vice chair. And as we heard, the election probably won't take a lot of time, but these other 2 items will be very significant. So we have a lot of good information that's will be presented there, and opportunities for you to ask questions or provide any thoughts that you have. The meetings will be from 6:30 until 9. So we're assuming that these will be after dinner meetings. So dinner was provided tonight, but that will not be happening. We'll have refreshments at the meetings, but we'd assume that this will give you time to get home or get dinner or whatever so that you can come and start. And we'll have refreshments starting at 6:15 for these meetings. So that really gives you just a sense of what your role is, the role of the chair, how the meetings will flow, and the timing. So what we'd like to do is just now have another opportunity to go around the room and hear from you just your thoughts on what are you taking away from tonight's meeting. We have time for public comment. At this point, we don't have anyone yet who has come in, but if they did come, we would give them time to speak. So let me take the mic. Or actually, I think it would be better, I'm understanding it would be better for the recording if people spoke into them. Does it matter if they speak it into the table mics? Okay, if it doesn't, then I know it sounds weird, but I think it's easier for people to hear us when we stand up. So I'd ask you to stand up, give your comments. So what are you taking away from tonight? Or if you have any questions, go ahead and share your question, and I'll capture those questions, and we could answer those at the end.
I think I'm taking away a very thorough understanding of who all of us are, and maybe what the expectations of our group will be.
And again, I would encourage you, introduce yourself too, because we're just trying to, again, get to know each other.
Hi, my name's Amy, the Water Nazi. I am having a much better understanding of the scope and what our position is and what we're supposed to be contributing to this whole thing. And again, I'm just really excited to learn, and I learn something every time so far. So really excited to keep learning and just be better service to my community.
Hello, Noe Villa, Sunrise Recreation and Park District, and I'm also taking away an understanding of what our role is, and I look forward to the working with all of you. It seems like they did a fantastic job in recruiting all the different variety of residents as well as commercial companies to do this.
Hi, my name is Javed Siddiqui. I'm an engineer, and I understand the role, and I'm looking forward to participating. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Monty Morris, and like the others have said, I've gained a better understanding and even a higher interest in the subject at hand, and I look forward to contributing.
Suzanne Guthrie, and I certainly did appreciate all of the information on these kinds of groups. I don't think I ever got that in a civics lesson, and it's interesting being here and kind of understanding a little bit more of what the behind the scenes are and the importance actually of attending meetings like this as members of the public. I am really looking forward to getting a little bit more of a sense of the nuts and bolts next time. Thank you.
Hi, again, I'm Rick Moore, and what I'm learning from this and what I'm taking away is appreciation for the magnitude of what we all have to do, this whole community has to do. The planning and all the effort that's been put in to get this to this point, and I'm continuing to learn a little bit about the diversity of all the different perspectives that everyone has to offer, and I'm enjoying listening to each one of you and hear what's going on, and it's going to be interesting as we move forward here with this.
My name is David Page, and Rick took my speech. And I am looking forward to this. This seems to be an incredibly large project, and it seems like there is a very diverse group of people who really know what's going on and people who really have no idea right here. And I look forward to working with you guys. Thank you for the opportunity and your transparency, by the way.
Hi, I'm Jenna Moser. Thanks for the opportunity to serve on this committee and to bring forward advocacy for broadband for Citrus Heights. Thank you.
You're going to be the broadband lady.
I'm Mike Nishimura, and I think it's going to be a long process, but it's going to be an interesting process, and I'm anxious to getting started on it.
Cindy Price, Sylvan Cemetery, much of the same, have a much better understanding of the purpose of the committee and looking forward to seeing the process carried through.
Peg Pinard, and I'm taking away a lot of questions about how we're going to be interfacing or making decisions or being asked to give our input to what questions. What kind of information are you going to be presenting to us that you would like our input? Sounds like we're all ready to give it, but there's going to be some kind of interaction here where you present information that asks us to come to some kind of conclusion. And so that's what I'm kind of taking away is a lot of question marks, excited about it, but still a lot of question marks about how this is actually going to function. Thank you.
Are there any specific questions that we should capture now that would be helpful to know?
You know what, you mentioned the Brown Act and correspondence, and one of the things I would like to do is I'm home and some of this gets digested and I go over some of the comments that I've heard, is to be able to write back and ask you the questions, and then, but somehow not be just in a lone discussion between the two of us, because everybody else here might have some of the similar questions or something that would trigger a thought for me. So I'd like to know how we're going to be able to communicate within the Brown Act, but still be able to have some kind of a discussion. Like, did you hear about what the city of such and such did in their water main program? And then maybe somebody else knows about something else. And that kind of discussion has got to obviously be limited among 19 people. And if we can somehow present those questions to you to put on the agenda so that other people will also benefit and have the chance to think about it. And I think that's one of the other questions I have. If we wait until the meeting, the next meeting, to hear the question, we've missed the opportunity to do some investigation on our own. And I don't mean to sidetrack you, I just mean to become more familiar with what it is, or what somebody may suggest or propose. So that kind of dialogue I would be excited about, and under the Brown Act, I'm not sure quite how we can do that and still have that kind of interaction and sharing of ideas and concerns, things like that.
Those are all great points. I think initially, to a certain extent, that dialogue does need to occur in a noticed open meeting. So if there is an item that, really is something where we need to have that dialogue, that's something that staff can work with you to add to an agenda. I also recognize that you're bringing up points where there may be discrete topics where it may make sense for a group to have a discussion maybe outside of a larger group. And that might be a situation where the CAC decides to have an ad hoc committee or some other smaller group that maybe have a little bit more flexibility on the Brown Act to have those types of discussions. But I would just say that, I would really work with Chris and Missy to kind of to structure that.
Oh, sure. Definitely.
Great. Thank you.
I'd also like to chime in.
Oh, yes.
One thing I would like to bring up is part of the reason for my participation as well as for Laura's participation and finally for Madeline's participation is we have some knowledge of various deliberative processes that can be used within the setting of a public meeting to go through and discuss these issues. So it would be a little less dry perhaps than what we saw this evening, and it would allow for further discussion. So as one point of discussion would be, David had brought up, why are we waiting so long to discuss main replacement basics? And part of the reason for that is that we are trying to carve out further time than you might see in a standard city council meeting or a standard commission meeting in another agency. It's to give us a little bit more opportunity to go through deliberative processes that are not typical, as it were, where everybody is standing or sitting at a dais and, talking, maybe receiving a little bit of input from the public, going through a presentation, but instead having an open discussion where thoughts are being exchanged in a slightly different manner. It's going to be a little bit more of a journey. It's going to require a little bit more time, but sometimes you do have to go slow in order to go fast. I hope that briefly gets into it, but that is my intent with that.
There is flexibility built into this process, as Chris and Josh have highlighted. And I think one of the things that we're going to have to do is, as questions and comments come in, is we're going to look at those on a case-by-case basis. And we'll interact with the person or the CAC member who asked the question to determine if it's something that should be shared with the entire group or if it's a series of individual CAC to staff questions that need research. So we'll take those. There won't be a one-size-fits-all approach, but one of the things we will do is we'll be careful to stay within the compliance of the Brown Act, but we'll find ways to allow for that and enable that and empower that deliberative process that needs to occur between meetings. So I think all of those points are very well taken, and I think we've captured all of them tonight. So thank you very much.
I mean, it's not that constraining. It's not where you can't talk about issues. It's just that there are some parameters, and believe me, I worked in a city where half of the Brown Act was based off of because of some of the conflicts. But it's not really that constraining. We have a good lawyer, so we're safe.
Okay, so our next person, if you stand and just, what are you taking away from tonight? And if you have any other questions, we'll add them to the...
Yes, hi, Catherine Cooley with the city. I'm in a lot of community meetings on a variety of topics as part of my job, and I am enjoying through this process getting to know some names and faces of other Citrus Heights leaders that I didn't know before. So that's my main takeaway from tonight. I'm looking forward to getting to know you all better, and I don't have any other questions at this time. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Doug McTaggart. I have a question for you folks. This is a big job, and I really wonder what we can do between meetings to prepare ourselves, educate ourselves for the next meeting.
Right. Good.
Come to water board meetings.
Well, the good news is that we've designed a process that's relatively slow and builds upon itself so that we can take you through the steps one meeting at a time so that there won't have to be a whole lot of research done outside of these meetings, particularly in the early phases as we start to build up into the study itself. As you can see, we're really starting pretty basic here in terms of fiduciary and governance issues, since many of the folks who are on this committee are new to that scene. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the water district itself, which is not specific to water mains, to create a context for you to then have a good base of information to work off of as we begin to look at these water mains. And then Roger and his team are going to take you through one step at a time through this process. So, to the extent that you wish to research pipe type and trends in water main replacements on the internet, knock yourself out. Have a good time.
I suspect, listening to many of these people, that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think so. This is a pretty conscientious
I listen to
group.
these folks, and they're not folks that come into meetings unprepared.
But I promise you, we're not going to grade you on a curve here.
Okay.
And we are
with me, I'd rather have you grade me on a curve, actually.
Okay. But really, in fact, I had some good conversations with several folks about this who are really lay people to this process. And that's okay. That's what we wanted. And so you're not at a disadvantage if you're not an expert on water mains. But I promise you, after this experience, you will be.
Thanks.
I am Kimberly Berg from Citrus Heights Car Wash. I think my takeaway is just I'm sitting here very excited about the whole process. Kind of peeling back the curtain, if you will, learning how to make sausage. I think it's going to be really exciting to learn more about what goes into the nuts and bolts of, water main replacements. I mean, I know for me, I take it for granted. I have pumps and plumbing at my business, and put a couple of tokens in, and miraculously the water comes out. But I know I'm going to have a more of a appreciation about that process, and I really am excited learning more about how it all works, and then having a hand in how it's all going to work out. So thank you for being transparent. Thank you for being open to our questions, and kind of dumbing it down for someone like me to help me understand the process. Thank you.
Patty Catalano, and I just want to thank you for selecting me to be part of this group. I've never done any type of community project like this, so it's all very new and very informative, and thank you.
Portia Middleton again. Redwoods, seriously? It's an engineer that terrifies me. But I really like the diversity of the people around me. You guys have got me really thinking about the kind of questions that really need to be put forefront when we're going through this process. So I'm really excited to get down into the weeds and really figure out this entire process.
Julie Byers. It's going to be a big process. It's going to be fun. It's going to be good to meet everybody and get to know people better. Thank you.
Rick Moses, and I appreciate that we have this goal that we have, and you got a plan for it. And as you always know, that most plans never work out the way that you want them to, and that with the questions and answers, that will at least help us lead us as we change those things and improve it.
David Wheaton, I'm excited about the process, and I'm excited about working with you all.
Hi, Dave Mitchell. I'm just excited to be here, excited to work with everybody, and looking forward to the next meeting.
I think just do a quick takeaway.
Tamar Dawson, I'm taking away enthusiasm to hear all of you and your excitement for working in this process, and I think it'll be a fun journey. So I'm looking forward to spending some time with you and figuring things out.
Rex Muir, I work for the district, and I would take away from this, wow, the selection committee nailed it, good job. We have a fantastic group here. We went through a lot of applications, and I think we got it right.
Hi again, Madeline Henry. My biggest takeaway was getting to meet each of you and learning a little bit more about you, and I'm excited to work with you going forward.
Roger Cohn with Harris, and in past public outreach activities I've done, I've always had to be on my toes. I can kind of get a sense I'm going to have to be on my tippy toes for this group. So I'm already sensing some very strong, informed questions, and I'm very much looking forward to working through all that throughout this entire process.
I'm David Gordon. I'm the operations manager, and I am really excited to work with all of you. I'm glad that you guys are also sharing that enthusiasm to bring to the table here. Very diverse group, so I really enjoy that. And you know, I joined the district about 7 years ago. I joined into the engineering department and worked alongside Missy, and you know, for a number of years, and we still continue to work alongside each other. But one thing that we mentioned with this project is really discovering some of the mains that we have right now, and that's what we're going to do together. So although you may have some questions right now, we also have the same kind of questions, and so this process is long, but it's also to help answer the questions for us too on the technical side, so we can then process it and give you guys some of the answers and provide you the information. So that's something that I really want to look forward to in this process. So thank you.
Josh Nelson, and just again, if you do have any questions about any of this stuff we talked about today, please let us know. We're here to help.
And Hillary Strauss again with the staff. I have an attitude of gratitude to all of you for taking so much time out of your busy schedules over the next 18 to 24 months to work with us on these very important projects to help plan your water district for the future. And so my takeaway is that tonight it was just great to meet all of you and to get to know each of you a little bit better. And remember, to echo something that our board president, Ray Reilly, said, we're not just planning out tomorrow's water district, we're helping to cultivate your interest in community leadership, whether it be with a special district like ours, and there are several out here. There's the Sunrise Recreation and Park District, there's the Sylvan Cemetery District, there's the San Juan Unified School District, there's the City of Citrus Heights, there's our district. So there's lots of opportunities for leadership, and so this is a wonderful gateway opportunity for you to be involved in your community. And if you decide you like this, hopefully you'll want to be more involved in your community as you go forward.
Chris Castrita, Citrus Heights Water District employee. I'm taking away two things. First, the breadth and depth of knowledge and experiences from across the Citrus Heights Water District. We have some folks who it sounds like this is their very first time really being and participating with a government agency in this sort of process. We have other folks who sound like they are very much old hands, and that is great. It's going to help to inform this process significantly. We've got some very astute questions being asked already, which is very heartening to see. At present, we are looking for ways to continue that conversation, as it was kind of alluded to, in between the meetings in a manner that is, in fact, transparent, open, and compliant with the Brown Act. We have some means for doing that. I would say, in as much as feasible, when you have questions within the context of these meetings, please bring them up, so that way we can be sure that if we can't respond to them within the context of a specific meeting, we will get back to you on that in as quickly as possible and keep it as transparent as possible. And in addition, we're looking for other ways in which to provide some additional information in between meetings that is available to all members of the public, so that way we can continue to be thinking about these things going into the next meeting, be that much more informed. Thank you.
And Ray, I don't think we got your takeaway. Did you have anything you wanted to say?
We have a board meeting Wednesday night. None of these issues have been developed in a vacuum. All of these issues pop up at our regular board meetings. So if you want to learn more about how the district manages issues, the decision-making process, come to a couple of board meetings in between these, and you will learn the process, and the process is wonderful. The staff is superb, and I do appreciate y'all coming out tonight.
Great, thank you. And again, if you have any questions, please contact Chris or Missy. And I know that Madeline had asked if you could all just leave your name tags on the desk, and then Missy is going to close us out, or just on the table in front of you.
So I'll do my quick takeaway and then I'll close this out. I'm just looking forward to working with you all, and I know we have a lot of work to do between now and May 29th, so we'll get to work here. So with that, I'll just ask if there's any public comment. It doesn't look like it, so we'll move on and close. So if you can go to the next slide. So thank you all again for coming. So just a next steps slide here. Our next meeting will be on Tuesday, May 29th, the day after Memorial Day. And we plan on doing it starting at 6 p.m. Is that correct?
6:30.
Or is it 6:30?
I think. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. It's 6:30, not 6. So you'll be getting an updated email on that. So 6:30 to 9 in this same room here. One last thing I'd like to point out, we do have our strategic planning meeting that we do every year. We plan this year for the next year's budget cycle. So we are doing that on Thursday, June 7th. We do anticipate, or we would like to have the Customer Advisory Committee participate in that. You'll be getting additional information on that, but I just wanted to give you a heads up on that date. It's June 7th. It's a Thursday, and it would be in the morning from 8 to 12. The meeting actually goes longer than that. So if you wish to stay past the 12 o'clock hour, you'd be happy to have you. And that's also going to be in the same location as well. So with that, if no one has any other comments, thank you again for coming.